On this episode of Still Loading, Gen is always watching.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are going to be continuing our little 2-episode mini-series on Cyan's Myst series. I guess it's a series squared. I don't know. Today we're discussing the sequel to Myst. In fact, that is in the title of the game. The game we are discussing is called Riven, the sequel to Myst. And joining me to help me round out this little 2-episode mini-series is my good buddy Try from My Life in Gaming. Try, how are you doing today?
Hey, happy to be here.
Happy to have you on again. I always love having you on the show, and when I reached out, I was looking for guests to talk about Myst and Riven, and you said you liked both, but that you preferred Riven, so I had to have you on to talk about Cyan's crazy follow-up to their worldwide success in Myst, which in Riven came out on October 31st, 1997. Worldwide, it did get ports later on to the Sega Saturn and the PlayStation, as well as more recently with iOS and Android. It was also ported to the Pocket PC in 2005, of all places.
Wow.
And it recently announced Cyan is making a fully remastered remake of Riven for modern systems, which I can't imagine how they're going to make it look even better, because I guess, spoiler alert, listeners, this game still looks really good.
It looks amazing.
Even over 20 years later. Like, actually, if you think about it, this is just shy. This is like 26 years later. No, 27. My apologies. 27 years later, almost, at least. It's like 26 and a half, but it's whatever. I don't feel like mathing. You all do the math. October 97. Anyway, yeah, man, I'm so excited to talk about this game. I played it for the first time earlier this year over on Twitch, twitch.tv/stillloadingpod. So if you want to check out more of the stuff I end up playing for the show, you can check it out there. But I really enjoyed my experience with this, and I'm excited to talk about it. So before we truly dive into this, we need to hear about our personal histories with it. We need to talk about how we first explored this mysterious world of Riven and Myst, this mysterious world. So Try, I want to throw it over to you, my friend. How did you first, you know what, feel free to also talk about how you got into Myst, since you didn't really get a chance to in the last one. Shout out to my previous guest, Doug from Nostalgia Marcanum, to talk about Myst. But Try, since these games are so closely connected, how did you get into Myst? And then in turn, how did you get into the sequel to Myst, Riven?
Yeah, I mean, you'd probably be hard pressed to find someone who was first exposed to Riven, I would say. Myst is kind of inextricably tied to anyone's story with that. But, we were talking just before the podcast. My story seems to be very similar to yours, where my uncle had Myst on his computer. And, people definitely wouldn't think of me as like a PC gaming guy. But Myst really captivated me. It was one of the games on his computer that most drew my attention. My family didn't have a computer until much later, 1997, as actually, which might be, I guess, further relevant to Riven. But yeah, I mean, I was really fascinated by it. I remember my uncle did have a guidebook for Myst, and
It's almost needed.
I mean, when I revisited the games when I was older, specifically actually to make a video on Cyan, where I actually visited Cyan and interviewed Rand Miller. I revisited them later, and it's like, okay, some of the things that I thought as a kid, I was like, how would you ever figure that out? I I get it now. Like I get the train of thought, but there's still some very obtuse puzzles. But I'm sure we'll get more to that kind of stuff later. But yeah, so when Riven came out, that first Windows PC that my family had, it was a piece of junk. It was a compact Presario, and it was no good. So sometimes it was almost like I wish I didn't have a computer at all, because now I've been teased with this ability to do computer things that I can barely do on this machine.
Mhm.
So like I remember getting this probably would have been later, I guess, because Final Fantasy 7 came out on PlayStation 1 in 97. But like whenever the PC version of Final Fantasy 7 came out, like that computer couldn't even play that
Mhm.
properly. Like the story I always tell about that was like the FMVs played upside down. And I've never talked to anyone who had that same experience. Like no one's ever been like, my computer did that too. Like no,
What a
my
weird.
my computer played the Final Fantasy 7 FMVs upside down, and then when it got to the gameplay, it could barely run. But that's beside the point. Riven and Myst could run. So these were like two of the, like those and like Chex Quest were like the games I played on my computer, because that's like about all I could get to run on that computer.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, when Riven came out, I was really excited. Um, I actually remember getting it at Best Buy, uh, and I was playing it for several days or weeks, and eventually I got to where I had to insert. I forget if it was disc 3 or 4.
Mhm.
Um, I'm pretty. It was one of the discs has a demo for another Sierra game. Uh,
Cyan game, you mean?
well, Sierra was the publisher, I think.
Oh, okay. Um,
Uh,
the publisher was Red Orb Entertainment, which I
oh,
believe.
okay,
Hold on.
maybe okay. Well, it was a demo for another game. I kind of don't think it was a Cyan game, but there
The
was a demo for another game
Mhm.
from the publisher on one of the discs, and that was like it was like whichever disc kind of had the information for like the smallest island in Riven was that disc, and it turned out that I had two of that disc and not
Okay.
one of like there
Oh,
was
no.
a missing, like it was either I'm pretty sure it was like either disc 3 or 4. I had a duplicate of one and not of the other.
Oh,
So I
man.
like I actually had to go back to Best Buy and get a trade it in and get another copy of Riven so I could actually like finish the game. So yeah, that was I mean that was kind of my first exposure to it, I guess. And I might have played it at my uncle's house before I had my own copy. I can't remember for sure, but yeah, I mean, it's a game that's always stayed with me. The visuals are on another level.
They
The
really are.
the quality of the world design is just so striking. I think the atmosphere and the mood of the game, and kind of the story. Like I feel like Gin is kind of an iconic video game villain. I love it. So where do we go from here?
Well, then I have to talk about my own experiences as well. So like you, I kind of played this at like a family member's house. I first, like, we didn't have a computer that was powerful enough to did we had an old Mac game. We had an old Mac computer. I think it was like a Power PC or something like that. I forget what the exact like model or brand of Macintosh computer it was, but it was a Mac. And so we were able to play Myst, but the first time I ever saw Myst, like I said in the Myst episode, was on my uncle's computer at my grandparents' house. And I remember just being completely captivated by it. And so when Riven came out, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts on Myst, obviously listen to the previous episode. But on when Riven came out, I remember my uncle showing it to me. He's like, "Look at this," and he opened up the case. He's like, "There's 5 discs." And I'm like, "What? What?" I
Yeah.
couldn't believe it.
I mean, people now probably think like, "Oh, that so many discs, so annoying." But like, there was that period of time, like I think it really kicked off with Final Fantasy VII and like
Hmm.
went up through the rest of that CD era before DVDs took off, where like multiple discs was like, whoa, that was almost like just like subconsciously burrowed itself into your brain and told you that like that is going to be the most amazing game ever. More discs equals better. And it was just mind
Hmm.
blowing.
I would almost equate it to what they do now when games reveal the world maps that they have. You know, like GTA 6, they showed the map of it, and everyone's like, look how big it is. Like, you can see a
Mm.
map, and you almost get that sense of, like, this game's going to be amazing. Look
Yeah,
how
or
big the
the
map is.
the cliche of, you know, you see that mountain over there, you can walk there, you know?
Yep. Which Breath of the Wild, I would say, is one of the first games to truly realize that vision. It's
Yeah,
the same thing.
and
Like,
in Riven, of course, when you see that mountain over there, you can go there, but you'll probably have to change a disc or 2 before you can.
yep, and you might have to open some doors and then close them behind you to find the hidden passages to get up
Oh,
there,
yeah, yeah.
which we'll get to. But yeah, I played it at my uncle's house. I loved it. I didn't understand that it was non-linear. I remember my version of progress was like, well, I made it up to disc 4. I only have one more disc left to go to.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
Without realizing that no, each there's 5 islands that make up Riven, and each island gets its own disc. So depending on which island I was on, determined the disc I was on, or a disc which disc I was using. It wasn't a way to mark progress. It was a way to just store game data.
Yeah.
And I was too young at the time to understand what the idea of a non-linear game was. So it was just it went over my head at the time, but I still remembered enjoying it. I remember really tinkering around a lot with it, and I honestly, it's funny. I almost make it a detriment to this game as well as Myst, where I think one of the benefits of me playing it all these years later and finally beating it for the first time just a couple months ago was I remembered a lot of the solutions. I remembered some of the hidden stuff in the game
Mm.
that my uncle showed me or that I discovered on my own just by clicking around. And if I didn't have that, I don't know if I would have remembered some of the things on it. And I don't that's why I'm curious that if I can try Myst 3 or some of the other Myst games in the Myst series and see what the puzzles are like in them, if without that memory, without that nostalgia, how am I going to be able to how am I going to figure it out? Because in Myst and Riven, I had nostalgia to fall back on that kind of gave me some of the answers to some of the more complex puzzles, which we'll once again
Yeah,
get
and
into.
I did play through Myst 3, 4, and 5 myself, like, because I wanted to include them in that episode that I did.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, well, I have to play through them. Even though Cyan didn't have anything to do with those
Yep.
particularly. I mean, Rand Miller did
Didn't
come
they
back
do it
as
with
Atris.
5?
Say what?
Didn't they come back for
Oh, you're
5?
right. They correct. Yes, Cyan did come back for 5, and Rand Miller continued to play Atris even for the ones that Ubisoft published.
And he
Um,
hated it.
he,
He
he
hates it.
he hated it, but I I feel like he was such a big part of what drew me into
Hmm.
those games originally, and I feel like the fact that he's not a trained actor like made it feel more real.
Agreed.
Um, you know, if that like, especially when like the first game was new, I I I wouldn't say that like I never had a difficult time like distinguishing, you know, fiction from reality. Like I understood that movies and cartoons were make believe, but there was still something about acting that was like so mysterious to me. I'm like,
Hmm.
how can people act like afraid and like this is really going like they're in this really like dangerous situation. Acting was just so mysterious to me. I'm like, how did they get that reaction without the person actually being in that situation, how did they get that emotion out of them? It just seems such an incredible skill to me, and I couldn't believe it. And I almost feel like that just like he speaks in such a soft, understated tone, and you just sort of feel like you've like stumbled upon this guy in this, you know, situation where he really needs your help. And you know, he doesn't like overact or like really, you know, hit hard on like his enunciation of particular words in the script. And
Hmm.
it just it has almost like this found footage sort of vibe to the FMV in a way. uh
I could see that.
you know, in the same way that, you know, like the people who made like Blair Witch Project, obviously they weren't like, they were inexperienced actors at that point, you know. I sort of think of it on almost the same sort of sense of like, just here's this thing, here's this video you've stumbled upon, but it's just like, and you know, using this strange technology to project the image and project the video. But you know, it's just there's something very just real and tangible about it, and that was a big part of what drew me in, because it's like I want to help this guy, you know,
I
and he's my
I
help.
I agree with you in that. I really do think that Rand Miller is a lot better than he gives himself credit for.
Yes,
I totally get that he doesn't enjoy doing it, so I don't begrudge him not wanting to. If you don't enjoy it, it doesn't matter how good you are at something. If you don't like it, then you know I get it. Uh, but
obviously he and his brother played the roles in the original game just
out of necessity.
out of necessity. Yeah, just I mean they didn't have the budget to get anyone else to do it. And he told me when I interviewed him, he said, you know, like with the first one, he's just messing around with his brother, and it was fine.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, as the projects got bigger and there's more like people around when you're shooting it and stuff like that, like I can completely relate to that. I mean, you know, one time, when I recorded a My Life in Gaming episode at my parents' house. You know, I'm used to recording that at my house with no one else
Mm-hmm.
there but my dog. And like I asked my parents, I'm like, hey, can you guys go out shopping for a few hours or something while I record this? Cause like I knew I would not be able to enunciate things and like give the performance that I give. I mean, not to say that I'm like a good presenter or anything, but like the way I do it, like I can't even get up to that level. Like I would just be too self-conscious about thinking like people
Mm.
are like, I don't have a problem with people watching the recording after the fact. Like it's
It's the
fine.
live
Like it's
reactions.
it's just like thinking, and also thinking about people who, you know, aren't used to hearing you speak in the same way that you speak when you are reading a script to the camera, because it's a different way of speaking, you know.
Mm-hmm.
To me it is anyway.
No,
So
it is you.
I can totally relate to Rand Miller being quite uncomfortable in that situation, but I'm so glad he did it, because I think Atris is an excellent character and would not be the same without him.
I'm really curious to see how the character grows as the series goes on. Because, like I said, I have not played anything else outside of Riven, and what I'm not surprised he was a little more anxious and hesitant after doing Myst to act, just because in Riven he talked. I remember, I don't know if it was in your interview or because I did watch it in preparation for
Oh,
this.
excellent! Yeah, I
Um,
watched it today myself because I haven't watched it in years. I thought this is gonna be good good review for myself.
it's a good. There was a lot of good information in it, but I can't remember if it was in in your interview with him or if it was something else. But he talks about how he loved making Mist, and Riven was a chore to make, and like not saying that
From
he's
the
not happy with
acting
the.
perspective, anyway, at least.
Was it fun for him from the development side? From my understanding, I thought he didn't really even enjoy the development. He likes the game. To be clear, it's not that he
Yeah,
doesn't think they put out a bad product. I thought the vibe I got is that he wasn't really happy with. He did not enjoy his time developing Riven, but maybe that's just from the acting
yeah. Well,
point.
or I mean, I didn't get that impression, but I'm sure there were complications of, uh, you know, just they
Mm,
were. he just said we were trying to do the best we had with the technology we had. And so they were, and as you can tell just by looking at the game, I mean, they were pushing for the cutting edge. I mean, they were
Yes.
doing, they were doing, I mean, to have a game from that era use CG and hold up to this day visually as well as it does. I, n- I mean, there were games released, you know, 8-10 years later that didn't have like in sort of their like promotional renders and stuff, because by that point most games were real time uh, rendering. But
Hmm.
even in their like promotional renders, like it would be at least 10 years before most of the game industry caught up to what they were doing in 97. I mean, even Squaresoft, that was, so praised for the world that they created in Final Fantasy 7, like I think Squaresoft was even a little bit behind, definitely behind Cyan, and maybe even behind some other companies like Capcom and Namco were doing pretty competent CG at that time. But I mean, I would say it wouldn't be until like Final Fantasy VIII where like Square Enix was really kind of leading the industry, especially on the Japanese side, on the quality of their computer generated renders. But I mean, Cyan was just so far ahead of the curve, and
Yeah.
yeah,
The textures they use, like I'm looking at screen grabs right now, and it's just the big dome that has the gold roof on it, that where you kind of get
oh
the
yeah,
final puzzle to where you solve the final puzzle,
and
um
you visit it
or
very
one of the
early
final
on
puzzles.
as well.
Yeah, it's like the first island you're on.
It's that location is extremely iconic. Yeah.
Mhm. It is just astounding, and same even with, like, the bridge away from it to the little alcove on the little other rocky outcropping, the village that you travel to with all the Rivenese who live there,
Yep.
and a lot of the textures they got, there was a big trip that the development team took down to New Mexico, where they got pretty much all of their textures from. They went to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they took hundreds and hundreds of photos of various types of wood, sand, stucco, adobe. I mean, there's a whole bunch of others. They probably took pictures, trees as well, I would assume, and they just used all that for the textures, and it still looks amazing. Like
Yeah.
it. Just to put it in context, listeners, I very very seldom start off with talking about the visual presentation of a game. I almost never do, but this game still looks amazing. I'm looking at screen grabs, and a lot of this stuff, it feels real, even in some of it. Like some of it you can see is very gameish, but for the most part, like it's just amazing. I will say the parts that look the most game like are the water, which doesn't surprise me. Water physics
Sure.
are super
Yeah.
hard to get,
That
but
was
once
hard to
again,
pull off then. Yeah.
like you said, it's 1997. What do
Yeah.
you expect?
Yeah. And like the little interstitial FMVs that like where you're riding the rail cars between
Hmm.
islands and stuff. Like those are obviously like compressed with the technology of the time that would fit on a CD-ROM.
Hmm.
So those are not that beautifully compressed by today's standards at all. But still, I mean, just a gorgeous game. And believe it or not, I think that the Ubisoft games 3 and 4 hold up visually well in a similar way, and they actually do this other thing where each sort of location that you're standing on, instead of like having to click left or right to like turn your perspective, you actually like can look all around you, and
Okay.
a complete it's got this crazy sensation of like feeling like a VR game without actually, just like looking at your monitor, you almost feel like you're like looking around in this real space, especially because like they still use the live action characters. So like they're just walking around talking to you, but you can look away from them and then turn back around and they're still there. And it is kind of a surreal experience because game worlds aren't built that way anymore, and really not a lot were built in that style at that time that 3 and 4 came out. I think they are also very visually striking games, but I think the overall art direction of Riven has made it stand out as the most iconic and memorable of the Myst series locations. And in my opinion, I mean, I guess the Island of Mist is probably the most iconic,
Yeah.
but Riven, I love that world. It's just something about it is just so captivating to me.
No, I'm with you on that. And while I do think that the Mist Island is the most iconic of the series, I will say that art direction in Riven I think is a lot
Oh
better than
yeah,
in Mist,
ab-
and that's all thanks to Richard Vander Vendy. I don't know how you pronounce his Vander Wendy is how it would be like written, but I don't know if you would pronounce the W as a V. But he joined the team after seeing a tech demo of Mist at Digital World Expo in LA. Um, and I had it might have been your interview. What was it? No, it might have been in the
yeah.
making of
He
Riven
didn't
documentary
come
that
up
just came out.
in my interview.
He what? Sorry,
He did not come up in my interview.
he did not come. Okay, so there was a making of Riven documentary that the Video Game History Foundation recently uh, restored and put it into like really high resolution. It might have been on there, but they talk about how he met him and how he apparently, like, when they first met him, they thought he was a kid. He looked so young, but the dude had already worked at ILM, where he worked on the Willow movie and Inner Space. He also worked on Disney's Aladdin movie, and he did a lot of the design for that. He they credit him with bringing the more edgy visuals, quote unquote, and edgy visuals and designs to Riven, and it shows. Like, I love Mist, but Riven, there is just something cohesive
Yeah.
and interesting about everything in this game. Where we can talk a little bit about the world of Riven here. And you know what? We've been talking all this time. We're almost 30 minutes in. We should at least set up for the listeners what the premise of this game is.
Yeah.
And then we can talk. We can continue to go into it. So the premise of this game is you play as the unnamed player character, like you did from Mist, and the game takes place immediately after Mist leaves off, assuming that you got the good ending of Mist. And basically you are in this you're in the, I think it's the world of the Denis, which is where
Yeah.
Atris is currently trapped,
Right.
and it has the book of Riven. So for those who remember, maybe you don't remember, um, the in the Mist series, you can link to different worlds. They call them ages, but you can link to different worlds or ages by opening a book, a linking book. You place your hand on the picture; it's a moving image, and you'll get sucked into that world. And you generally you need another book to link back to the other age. What the Denis do, which it hasn't really gone into much in this game, and I from my understanding, they explain a lot more of it in the sequels. The Denis practice this thing called the art. Proper noun is just called the art, and it's kind of like they almost have like the ability to create worlds into existence. Like they can write them into existence.
That's actually kind of central to the plot of Riven in a lot of ways
Yes.
is the difference in perception. Are they creating the world or are they simply creating a link to a world that exists somewhere in the multiverse? And you, because part of the art is you have to build uh, your age based on reasonable principles, and if things are too imbalanced then it will lead to an unstable age, which the the traditional belief of the Dunny is that uh this is a actual place that exists in what we would mostly today call a multiverse, right?
Hmm.
um it exists out there in the many possibilities, and we are just creating a way to go there. But then the more fringe view, which was held by Atris's father Gin, was that they are creating these worlds and that they are the gods of these worlds and can do whatever they wish with them.
Well, and it's alluded to that they can create the worlds in Myst, because in one of the books, I believe it's, I forget the name of the age, but it's I think it's like the ship. It's with the ship. I forget the name of that age, but in the ship, they in the journal for it, Atris describes how it was just three rocks and he wanted to add a boat to it. So he used the art to create a boat in that world, but something didn't take and the boat like merged with the rocks, which is how you get the level as the way it is, which is why I thought that they might have some way of creating the worlds, but they're not in full control
Yeah,
of
I
their
mean,
creation.
my interpretation, I guess, would be in like that situation. And of course, they may have not fully developed the lore by that point of developing Mist yet,
Hmm.
but I guess my interpretation would be, there is a version of that age where everything is normal, and then there's a version of that age where the boat is where it shouldn't be and is merged with this. Like it exists out there, but it would be considered an unstable age because it was built um, based on faulty ideas of physics or logic, I suppose, right?
The way I guess I always interpreted it was that it wasn't necessarily they just accessed a different one of the infinite possibilities. It was that they had the ability to change one of the worlds, but it's not
And,
like
and maybe they do. Yeah, yeah.
but
I
not
mean,
in like but not in like an omniscient way. Like they could like, I want to make a boat, but the world's like, yeah, well, you want it there, too bad, I'm putting it here because whatever, because
right,
that
right.
also would
Well, I mean, I guess it's like dropping an object into a game, right? Like the physics might freak out and it might not do what you expected as the developer, right?
And that's how I interpret it. And that also makes sense for the plot of Riven, where the reason you have to go into the world of Riven is Atris, who is the father of Sirius and Akanar from the first game. He's the one who created the Mist Island and linked to all the different worlds. He is desperately trying to keep Riven together. He does not want Riven to fall into pieces, so he has to keep writing using the art to keep Riven barely held together by sticks and glue, pretty much. So, and he would go in to get his wife Catherine for himself, if it wasn't for the fact that as soon as he stopped, the moment he goes in there, Riven would fall apart. So he
A-
needs to keep
Am
on
I
writing to
am I
save it.
am I remembering right that his wife is originally from Riven?
Yes,
Okay.
you find out as you play through the game that she is Rivenese, and that causes some issues with some of her culture and her family and whatnot, which is we'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, so you have to go in to Riven, and what's interesting is compared to Mist, like Mist, you travel to four different ages on top of the exploring the island of Mist. In Riven, there's one other age you go to towards the end of the game, but other than that, every single thing. Well, I guess you start off technically in the Denis with
Yeah, which
Atris, but
I'm actually not sure if that is that might actually be on Earth, like inside the Earth. If I'm remembering correctly, I think the Dunedin civilization was like underground in the Earth. I could be a little I could be wrong on that, but I think so. So that area might actually be on Earth, but I don't know. I could
you
be.
know what? I should really maybe I'll do a follow up episode where I read all the Mist novels that came out, the Book of
Oh
Atris,
yeah,
the
yeah.
Book of
I mean,
Tiana.
I'm relatively oblivious to them as well, but I bet they're pretty interesting.
I've heard they're very good. I've heard nothing but good things about them, so I should really give it a shot at some point. But yeah, so that's pretty much the setup to this game. You play as the unnamed player character who has to go into Riven to rescue Catherine, and Atris gives you a book that will essentially trick the evil her captor, his wife Catherine's captor Gen,
Which is
who
Atris's father.
which is Atris's father, who have um, fundamental differences on how they view using the art. Gen is much more authoritarian. He got sent to Riven by Atris and Catherine, and he became a dictator there. He turned himself essentially into a god. Which, as you explore around the world, you'll see There's all these different like shrines geared towards him. There's
Yeah.
literally like a sacrifice. He sacrifices some of the Rivenese to this creature called the Wark. It's
Oh yeah.
there's so much world building in this game,
Yeah.
so
I
much
mean,
more than in the original.
even the original game box, like inside the box was the case, the slip cover with the 5 discs, and even that like had this very um sort of like religious iconography style depiction of Gin.
Hmm.
Sacrifices, and very much sort of this sort of like sort of stonework mosaic art. So that's very much become his, lording over the Rivenese is very much like completely woven into the imagery of the whole game.
It is, and like it. That's what I think makes Riven so interesting is that there's so many small tidbits that you can glean from it. Like I was listening to an episode of the guest on my Myst episode, Doug's podcast, Nostalgia Marcanum. He did an episode on Myst with Cole Ross from Watch Out for Fireballs, and they talk about how much of the story is told through just the visual storytelling through you just
Mm,
explore the world and you see the environments and
yes.
you piece things together. I'll be the first to admit I am awful at that. I cannot I like if you present a story to me, I almost always prefer it straightforward as opposed to kind of told through
Mm.
like environmental storytelling like the Dark Souls games and whatnot that they do that a lot.
Now, see, Dark Souls, like a lot of it flies over my head, but I feel like it was done pretty well in Riven.
See, I agree 100%. I I normally can't stand it, and that's to me that's not a problem with the game. That's just my own personal preference. Riven, I think, does such a good job of marrying the two, where they have a straightforward narrative. You have to go in, rescue the dude's wife for him because he's desperately trying to keep the world together. Um, and in turn, she is not being held just strictly captive. She actually helps there is like a resistance group, Tugen, who was taken over this world, and she is helping that resistance group, and she helps take them to a different age where they cannot be watched by Gen. I think it's the age of like Tay or something like that. I'd have to double check. I think it's like the age of Tay or something like along those lines.
I
It
don't
is
remember
Tay. It
exactly,
is
but
Tay.
that's how they escape the collapse of Riven, right?
That's how they're going to try to escape the collapse of Riven. Like the idea was she was going to get all the Rivenese out of Riven because she knew it was going to collapse. But so much so that because they knew Gen was going to find them or was going to track them. So the linking book to it's actually the Age of Moedy, which is in the player travels to Tay, the Age of Moedy. That's a very quick direct rip from Wikipedia, but that's an easy way to describe it. But she takes the Rivenese who believe her and the rebellion, who are part of the resistance. But there's a lot of Rivenese who are loyal to Gen, who believe that he is the deity he claims to be, or like has the religious power he claims to have, type of thing. And what's cool about the world too is that they build the world into the puzzles. There's a lot of puzzles where you need to study the world to understand it. And one, like, I guess we'll start spoiling some of the puzzles here. Um, in I forget which island because each island I think has like names. I can't remember though. But there's the one with the town in it, like the Rivenese town, and they all kind of like live on the sides of these cliff walls. It's really cool. The visuals are awesome. You have to travel all the way up to the top of this town to then drop one of the like it's a basically like a submarine, like a submersible almost, but it runs along train tracks. You drop it into the water, and then you can go all the way around to the other side, get in, and you can ride the train, and you can go to different places. And I remember this part captured my imagination as a kid because there's these like pockets of air that are like stations that you can stop
Oh
at,
yeah, yeah.
but like I have no idea how the air stays still. or like how the pockets stay open, and like it's almost like Moses parting the Red Sea, you know, but like in these individual
Yeah,
spots. But
yeah.
what I was getting to was in one of those stops on this like underwater train track is a school. And in that school, it teaches, there's a little mini game, which is really fucking dark now that I think about it, because there's a mini game that's supposed to teach you the counting system of the Rivenese, which,
Oh yeah, yeah. Which is it's yeah that like that's one of the aspects of the game that like totally throws you for a loop.
hmm and I actually figured it out. I understood what it was doing. However, there's a puzzle in the game later on that makes you extrapolate on that. So basically what the game mini game was in the school was like, I remember I said before how Gen would sacrifice people to the Warg, this big underwater creature.
Yeah.
Well, he there's a mini game of a little wooden figure, and you hit the button, and it's basically like Russian roulette with this Warg, where you hit the button and a symbol will appear, and then the symbol correlates to a number, a number that we know. You'll see a symbol appear, and then the whichever, there's like two people hanging upside down, like two little wooden figures, and whichever one's turn it is, it will go down a certain number of notches, like 1, 2, 3, and just drop like a half inch each time. And so you have to keep doing this mini game until you can see all of the different numbers and find out. So whatever symbol pops up, you can count how many times it drops, and that's the number that it's supposed to correlate to. Really clever puzzle, in all honesty. Like I actually really liked that, but it later on it gets used where the you have to look at the puzzle and the symbols, recognize the pattern, which I don't think is very good. I don't think the pattern in it is really logical, in my opinion.
Well,
Like
I
there's
mean that
logic to it, but it was
yeah.
it was
I mean
too hard for me.
that's where I think this was kind of like the tail end of the era where it would like would have been considered widely acceptable to expect the player to write things down. I think eventually, it's like, oh, like people just don't know what to do if they don't have like an in-game journal these days to keep track of it. But uh you were supposed to take a lot of the puzzle solving outside the game, right? Put it to paper, mull it over in your head. It wasn't all things where, okay, you have to solve this puzzle. The game puts the pieces in front of you. Like you have to. There is a lot of this was over here, and you need to make a note of it.
hmm I mean, it's very much, I mentioned it in the Myst episode. Both of these games are very much, you have to write stuff down. And in fact, so much so, I mentioned this in the Myst episode as well. In the original game, in the original Myst game, they included a journal for you to write your
Yeah.
notes in.
Yep.
I still have my notes from my Riven playthrough of me figuring out this counting system. But even with writing it down, I don't know. There's certain puzzles in this game that I really just don't think are good.
And I don't remember a lot of specifics of
Well,
how
I
a lot
can
of them came
jog your
together.
memory, so don't
So yes,
worry.
please do.
So puzzles that I actually think were good, even if I was not a huge fan of them. Just so you're aware, listeners, if you don't want spoilers on how to play through some of these puzzles, just letting you know, I'm not going to necessarily directly give the answer, but I may be giving it out or dancing around it, and you might be able to infer some stuff. Just wanted to let you know, just in case you're worried about it, spoilers for the puzzles. Um, One of the final puzzles to like give power to all the different domes at the end of the game, uh, you have to move these marbles in specific spots, and the way you do it, you notice that there's specific shapes on the grid for these marbles, and those shapes correspond to the shapes of the islands. And you see there's a specific island you can go to that has a topography map of the the 5 islands of Riven. And they talk about how like the one island is no longer even like part of the archipelago. It's drifted so far away that you can't even see it anymore. So the only way to get to it is through one of the linking books,
Mm.
which we'll talk about in terms of the story later on. Um, and so what you have to do is you have to, and this is why this part I think was a little frustrating. Unless it's written in Gen's journal in his lab, you have to look at the 5 islands on this topography map, which is very time consuming to do. You have to, when you get to the island with a topography map, there's like 2 spots that you have to go. One, it lets you select which island you want to view the topography for, which are the 5 islands. And so you click on it, and then it takes like 5 seconds, like, or maybe even 10, but like 5 seconds for like a cool little like CG animation thing to happen below you, and the island will rise up out of like this plateau. But that's not
Yeah.
where you actually view the island. You have to then turn around, go behind you, and go into like this little like dome lab thing, and then the topography of that island will appear there, and you can choose if depending on what shape the island is, like if it's an L, if it's a square, if it's a rectangle or whatever, it's broken up into smaller perfect squares. It might be 2 squares tall by like 4 squares wide or something like that. And then you have to click on the individual square until you find the orb, which is where the domes that you found all across the island. And then you have to take a note of the shape of the map you're on, the shape of the island in general, and then which square specifically that dome appears in. And then you have to, of course, link the color of there's because it's colored marbles back in the middle island. You have to link the correct color to the correct island. And I believe it's relatively easy to figure that out. I forget how I figured out the color things. But it is like that part was pretty straightforward. I just didn't that puzzle I thought was really cool, but so time consuming and so tedious. So part of me thinks the puzzle itself is good, but the implementation was a little rough.
Mm.
Um, I also really liked the revolving door, even though I know that is time consuming as well. I thought that was really fun.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember, when I was first in that area as a kid, I was just
mhm,
like so fascinated, like to see like a completely different path in front of me than what I expected relative to where I thought I was positioned, right? And then
mhm.
when you can finally see this like promising path ahead of you, it's just like exciting to see like what's on the other side.
It's amazing. It's a really fun the visual way it presents it is just super fascinating to me. All the artwork, once again, shout out to the dude I mentioned before, Richard Vander Vendy. I have no idea. I should really look up how you pronounce his
Something
name.
like that.
We'll just call him Rich. Shout out to Rich. The guy I don't know, but shout out to Rich. Um, I really liked the visual side, like the beetles that are hanging on the wall, and you can like pull down on a
Oh
pull
yeah.
string and the wings go out.
Oh yeah, oh, the way they open up, like, and the sound
Yeah.
effect that it has, like, it comes together in this really cohesive way. The way that you describe, some of these, like, complicated puzzles and stuff, I think that's a big part of the reason that I see, the Myst games legacy in the broader culture of games to fall in a really strange place. Because eh, you know, you and me, we're talking to, the amongst ourselves and among, other, what people would term the quote unquote core gamers. I don't necessarily love that terminology, but you know what I'm
Hmm.
talking about. And I feel like in that community, everyone knows what these games are, but I don't think they are especially beloved or held in like ultra high regard. uh I mean, maybe I'm a little wrong, but like you don't see people gush about these like you would see even other PC adventure games of the era, like King's Quest or Police Quest or Space Quest or any of the LucasArts games, especially, right? I feel like those games uh ingrained themselves much more within the core gaming community. And I feel like I saw this a lot with the Myst series video that I did. I feel like a lot of the commenters are people who are not really from that core gaming community, but yet these Cyan games still stay with them, still mean a lot for them. They were, at that time, Abduction, which was their spiritual successor to their first spiritual successor to Myst. That wasn't out yet, and I saw that the people who were hyped up about that game were, again, I didn't get the impression that these were, your people that are going out and buying, your newest Mario and your newest Zelda and your newest, AAA Naughty Dog or other, big Sony tentpole game, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they weren't out there playing Dark Souls. Like these were people who, like, very specifically, like Myst and maybe a few other token PC games here and there. Generally, I would say an older audience, who, in the early 90s were, tech savvy and, into buying, the latest computers and, getting a CD-ROM drive and into like the whole multimedia revolution,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily the people who remained in that core gaming community. But I feel like I feel like part of what maybe made them connect to these games were that these games use, I think, a game design language that is unlike most other games. Like, how did we learn that if you light all the torches in a room in Zelda or a Zelda-like game, that the door opens? Or,
Yeah.
you like that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. When did we learn that? How did we learn that? Why did we learn that? Why is that still a trope? I don't know. But
I
it's it's not confusing to us. But if you step back and think about that, it's like that don't make no dang sense. And I could totally understand, the average person who might be not a core gamer but interested in games. They're like, well, how would I have ever figured that out? Right? Like, that doesn't make any sense because they don't. That's just like this ingrained part of the language of video games that we just don't understand. But if you step back and think about it, like, that's not really a logical puzzle. And even though the puzzles in the Myst series are extremely abstract and very difficult and require you to cross-reference a lot of information, I feel like whether you are one of those so-called core gamers or whether you are sort of more casual or on the outskirts of gaming, I feel like you're on this sort of level playing field where all of us are having the same challenges, same level of understanding about how the game works and what we're supposed to do. It has its own language of puzzle design and solutions, and how you learn about the world and gather that information. I mean, maybe I might be over exaggerating, and maybe it uses, more tropey design than I'm thinking. But it I guess my point is these games have always felt very different and unusual in their puzzle design and approach to puzzles, that I feel like that is a big part of why the core gaming community, like, doesn't, like, be like, oh yeah, Myst and Riven,
See
and
it.
yet there is still that audience out there who loves it, but it is more often not, wouldn't really consider themselves to be part of that broader gaming community. I don't know. I'm probably going in circles here.
Well, I think there is an element to what you're saying that I think it's very important. Where, not saying that all of it's not important anyway. But what the core gaming audience, this Myst and its series in general, appealed to a group of people who weren't the core gaming audience. And whenever something like that comes along, there's a lot of gatekeeping that comes along in gaming communities where it's like, well, that's not for real gamers. I mean, now you see it with a lot of like the graphics nerds. Like I don't play. I heard about someone that I was talking to you off mic about. I was chatting with my friend Eric from the Unlockables, and he was mentioning how he saw in some Discord servers like some people literally saying like, I refuse to play a game if it's not at 60 frames per second.
Oh, I
And
mean, there's some people who say that like 120 frames per second is a little on the slow side for them. And it's like,
that's just, it is mind-boggling to me that people have those opinions. And
yeah,
like,
well,
listen, I'm not saying that you don't have to enjoy the higher frame rates or you prefer them. That I get it, I get that. But to say to completely like block yourself off, I'm like, if a game's not going to run on 120 frames per second or 60 frames per second, buddy, you're blocking yourself off from a lot of
yeah,
games then,
yeah.
just
I mean,
on some
it's.
arbitrary thing that your eye can barely tell the difference of. Like
I
I
mean,
can
some people. I mean, I'm probably painting myself out as a peasant here, but like, I think the jump from 30 to 60 is massive, but
I
60 to
agree with that.
120 is like, it's kind of like, oh, okay, whatever.
I know, I'm kind of
um,
with you on that.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think you can get used to anything. I think people just need to take an open mind and not just like be immediately revulsed by it. But then again, admittedly, my tolerance was built up pretty high by uh, N64 being such a core part of my teenage years, right? But
Well
don't I love smooth frame
well,
rates
and
and everything, and I love it when games like how really nail that consistency. I'm fascinated by that stuff. But if the game fails to do that, then as long as it's still like the whole package comes together, I
well,
can totally get used to it. But
and to bring it back to what we were talking about here, the reason I even brought that up is like there's always going to be some group of people that gatekeep in the gaming community. It's like, well, you're not a real gamer unless you meet these specific criteria that only I care about. The Dark Souls crowd with the get good stuff. Like you can only real gamer if you play on the hardest difficulty shit. Like the not to saying all Dark Souls fans are like that, but the stereotype of that fan base type of
sure,
thing is
sure,
what I'm referring to. Um, and when Myst and Riven came out, these games were designed for a more casual audience. Like I talked about it in the Myst episode. Rand and Robin Miller were more interested in making worlds than they were making games. And it really shows. Like you look at the amount of world building in both Myst and Riven, and we spent the first 40 minutes just talking about the setting, not
yeah,
even really going into specifics of story, just like talking about various elements of like the religion of Gen and the Rivenese, and how like we didn't even talk about like the whole like the fact that like all the stuff going on with the resistance in Riven versus Gen, and where Catherine, we touched on it, but there's still so much to it.
yeah.
There,
I mean, it's just I think it is one of the most striking video game worlds ever
yes,
created. I mean,
100%.
it's so evocative. And whether you are a fan of the puzzle design or not, I mean, you know what? I think it's fine. Like, if you just want to use a guide to get through it, and you don't want to think about the puzzles, that's fine. I think though that this is just a world that like everyone should experience, because
And
it just you owe it to yourself to see this world, and especially as well aesthetically and visually and technologically as it generally hold up. um I think it's just a fantastic achievement of artistic design and world building. Regardless of what you think of it
mhm.
as a game.
Well, and I think the way that I would recommend people playing to play this game is to keep a guide handy, but don't use it until you're completely stuck. And the
Yes.
reason I say that is because part of the world building and storytelling is the aimless wandering, trying to
Yes.
figure out. Like you need to, in a weird sense, and I normally hate this type of design, but this is a game that is designed for you to get frustrated with it
Yeah.
because
Well,
it
yeah.
it wants you to click around and explore. And I will say, in terms of their puzzle design, one thing I appreciate with this is that there's only really one puzzle that makes you go back and forth from island to island to figure out the puzzle. By and large, each island in this game, the puzzles can all be solved by information that you obtain on that island
Mm.
for the most part. Um, there's a handful that my least favorite puzzle, which I'll get to in just a moment, makes you grab things from around a handful of islands. But the islands are small enough, and the world is small enough where it's not like you're exploring like a Grand Theft Auto world and having to remember, oh, what's this one random symbol or sound you heard on the far side of the map, and then you have to drive 20 minutes to get to the other side. No. Like you can click through the world pretty fast and get through the islands pretty fast. So it's
Yeah.
easy to get the information you need, and you don't have to really wait that long, especially in the remakes where you don't have to load discs um, to figure it out. But like it, it's a game that wants you to struggle with the puzzles because by exploring the world, you get a much broader appreciation for the lore of that world.
Yes. You'll see like different symbols and
Hmm.
glyphs of animals that you maybe haven't seen yet or haven't heard yet. And maybe, you know, you touch an object and it plays the sound of a certain animal. And you might not understand what that's for at first, but you know, you later will like see these creatures or see these symbols used in other environments. And I think, you know, piecing together the story of the world through, as you say, some of those aimless wanderings and, you know, poking at the walls and seeing what does what. uh the world sort of configuring itself in your brain is almost like a metagame unto the game itself, right? Like
Hmm.
that is very much part of the experience. And I just it's such a great game world that like I think you have the right of it. Like keep the guy. I actually have actually somehow I have two of like the official guide for Riven sitting on my bookshelf. I think one must have been mine and one might have been my uncle's. I don't know how I ended up with two, but somehow I have two. Um, and I'm sure I use it a fair bit, but also you'll I think have a more rewarding experience if you explore as thoroughly as you can before starting to fall back on some usage of the guides, because you will understand the pieces of the puzzles that you're interacting with, and you'll understand um, more of the world and more of the culture and more of the iconography
Yeah.
and soundscape that can also play a
Sound
role.
is very important in this game, and I want to use this chance to rant. I got a beef with
Oh, okay.
one of the puzzles.
Let's hear it.
So the one of the major puzzles, I already referenced the marbles thing there. That one's a little confusing because there's six marbles, but you only actually need to move five of them. So you're like, where do I put the sixth one? You don't. You can just leave it
Red
there.
herring.
It's a red herring, which is annoying. I actually had someone in Twitch chat saying, like, just remember, if you pay attention to Gen's journals, he's obsessed with the number five. He constantly refers to the number five. So, like, you
Mm.
have to read the journals a lot, which is fine. I don't have an issue with that because the journals, they're a little bit too long for my liking, but they're never like, it's not awful, but they're a little long. But in any case, here's my beef on the island with the Rivenese village. There's these balls like embedded into walls, and they have a symbol. And
Mhm.
once you learn how to count with in the Rivenese language, you use that counting to see like, okay, this circle, this ball that's embedded into the wall or to the ground or to this rock has the symbol of one on it, or it has the symbol of two or three, or so on the ball it's an eye, and when you click on it it'll roll back and forth, and then you can see the symbol. So now you know you have a symbol. There's a sound that plays in there, and I'll be honest, like, I didn't notice the sounds were different because the balls are far enough apart, and if you don't see them right away, you're not going to realize that the balls mean anything. So you all you know is that there's like a 1 2 3 4 5, and I'm like, okay, so I know these are 1 2 3 4 5, but what am I supposed to do with them? Well, when you get to there's a secret area that it's not hard to find just by one of the other major parts of the game is by pixel hunting, and I use pixel hunting loosely. I don't think pixel hunting is such a negative term usually. I don't think this game does pixel hunting poorly. I think that
No.
because the visuals are so striking,
And
you
you're not so much like actually like picking up items for inventory so
mhm,
much. You're interacting with with machinery or uh, you know, objects, poking and prodding, seeing what they do, or gathering information. But you know,
exactly.
it's not like, oh, where's this little dot of a thing that I need to pick up, or I didn't even know I could pick that up. Because you're not, for the most part, you're not building an inventory, to my recollection. Like you collect some books and pages, but other than that, I don't think.
You collect information more than you actually collect objects. That's
Right.
pretty much its inventory. The inventory is the information that you get to solve the puzzles, and that's
Right.
honestly pretty much it.
Like, I'm
But
sure a speed run of this game is ultra fast because if you know the information, you can act on it quite quickly. In fact, I want to say I one time played through the game like and got to like the the tree village. I think it's a tree, right? That's on the box of the game. Like I got there like super fast, if I recall one time.
mhm.
But
I
anyway,
mean, it's one of those games where if you know how to solve the final puzzle, you don't need to do any of the others. It's the same thing with Myst. Like if you know how to solve the final puzzle, you don't have to get any of the red or blue pages. You can just go
yeah,
solve the
yeah.
final puzzle. Um, but like, so what you're supposed to do when you find this hidden area, it has a bunch of gravestones on it, and on those gravestones are symbols of animals. What you're supposed to do is keep track of the five numbers, write down the five numbers, and then notice remember the sound they create, and then associate that sound with an animal. So when you get to this ring of, like, they're not actual gravestones, but they look like gravestones. These ring of like stone slabs with these carvings on them, you should see like, okay, well, number one, this sounds like a frog. So where's the frog one? And then you have to find the stone slab that has a pictograph of a frog, which some of those are up to interpretation because once again, it's done stylized in the style of like Rivenese. Um, so these balls are all over the island. So you can't write down a sound. You can write down what you think a sound sounds like, but in the way you're supposed to solve these sounds is that you'll have periodic like interactions with other animals on this island. Like you might hear a flutter and you might think that's a bird. Just kidding. It's actually like a beetle that you found like on the side of a post that you might have accidentally clicked on. The frog is also hard to get to. Like, I mean, you can figure out the sound of a frog without actually having to find the frog sound, like find the actual frog to cross reference the sound from the ball with the sound of an actual frog. But to get that frog, you have to place a piece of food on a trap and then drop the trap and then walk away and then come back and then bring the trap back up and a frog will jump off. It's like so
Oh yeah.
obtuse. It's so obtuse. And the worst of the worst is that one of these five sounds are a fictional fucking animal, the wark.
Well,
And you have to find the wark by exploring one of the many other islands, and you get a little bit of the idea of like how Gen has rigged this world to like in his favor, where like it makes it seem like he's this all-powerful being when in actuality he has like a bunch of technology hidden underneath the islands. There, like he sits on like this throne in this underwater chamber, like really egotistical as hell, and you can hit a button and you will see the wark come up to you. And actually that section there is how you figure out the colored beads, by the way. I just remember that. There's like colored lights tied with like
oh yeah.
the island. And there's stuff like that where you have to cross, but like all these things you're able to figure out for the most part, just by remembering. But the sound specifically, maybe it was easier for other people, but I hated this puzzle, dude, because you can't write down a sound. And on top of that, if you're not paying attention, the way the sound when it plays, when the sound plays, it plays when you rotate the ball. So when you click on that ball and a ball, it'll twist up, and you know how,
Has
like,
like
imagine
that sound, that like
It,
rolling stone.
yes, and it'll go like it'll do the rolling sound for the first roll really big, and then it slowly gets smaller because the ball is rocking back and forth and slowly settling to a
Yeah,
stop.
I sort of thought of it all. Think of it as almost like one of those like bird call sorts of devices, you know, that like you like
Yeah, where it's
twist
like
it, and it like it makes a sound that's like, oh, it doesn't feel like rubbing these two things together should make that sound, but it does, you know.
exactly, and I hated it. I hated this puzzle so much because then
And
once you
also like you were streaming it, so like I feel like that is also like that just compounds the difficulty even more because I find it really hard to absorb information like that in the context of like streaming, like especially audio cues and things like that. I find to be really challenging
I
uh,
don't think
in a
I would have
streaming
had an
environment.
I don't think I would have had an issue with that because of streaming. I think I would have had an issue with that regardless. I think that puzzle is really obtuse because it asks you to keep track of five different things at once, assuming you even recognize the sound, cross reference them with the other things. So you have to remember the five different sounds, remember what they sound like, find the five other animals. Now theoretically you don't have to do this all at once, so I think the intention is that you're supposed to be exploring around, and you'll click on a ball, hear a flutter sound, and
Right.
then maybe be exploring, be like, oh, I heard that flutter
Yeah.
sound before, what
Yeah, I
was
mean,
this
all
thing I
that,
just
all the
found?
whole the end game of that puzzle, like this is a long, you know, that sort of a long game puzzle. Like, you know, and several things in the game are like that, where like you're not really like, okay, right now I'm working on this puzzle. Like you're like gathering information to solve puzzles that almost sort of span and encompass the length of the game or longer sections of the game, right?
Hmm. And it's just, I don't know, it's a puzzle that spans a large portion of the game, and then on top of that it's a necessary one. Like it's eh, I don't know. There's a handful of puzzles that like they span a large portion of the game or like a large areas of the game, and I don't have as much of an issue with them. Like the marble one, I don't think is bad, even though it's a little tedious. There's but a lot of the other puzzles, like I said before, all take place on one island. There's like the one island where there's a giant lake in the middle, and you have to up like lower and raise the water so that way you can crawl through a pipe, and it'll take you out to a spot that you could not have reached to otherwise. There's also then like there's a bunch of puzzles in this game too that rely on you noticing that when you walk through the door doesn't close. So if you close them, then when in what was behind the door that stayed open is now
Oh yeah,
passageways.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hate shit like that.
I
Like
I I kind of like it, but at the same time, like you know, I always think of you know the water temple in Zelda, and like how, you know, I don't think I think its difficulty is a little or in Ocarina of Time specifically, like I think its difficulty is a little overrated, but
agreed. I actually beat Ocarina again somewhat recently, and it was
yeah,
not that hard.
I think the water temple's difficulty is way overblown, but I think a big part of it is that one puzzle where you need to look under a block that has risen up and there's a passage under that, and that just there is like it's very satisfying when you figure it out, but like you don't think about those things necessarily. You don't think about like, oh, I should look behind where I came from because you think you know where you came from, or I should look under this thing that moved because you might have never, it would have never occurred to you that there was something under it or a passage behind it or something like that. I kind of like the satisfaction of discovering that kind of thing. Like, you know,
It is cool, but at least in like Zelda, like you have a camera you can control a little bit more. So
that's
there's a
absolutely
better
true.
chance of you being able to see it out of the corner of your eye. Versus with this, unless you close that door, you're not going to be able to I mean, you can figure it out just by randomly clicking, or maybe you try to walk through and you accidentally click the door closed, and you're like, oh, there's a passageway. But even then, I remember closing the door as a kid and not noticing that those were passageways on the left and right side in the one on the one island, because it wasn't distinct enough for me for it to stand out to my kid brain. Now, that could just be me being, me having a kid brain, but it I don't think it's an awful puzzle. It's just not my favorite. I
Yeah.
think
Well,
there's a
and
difference between the puzzle I was talking about with all the roly balls and the sounds. I think that's a bad puzzle. I think that asks too much of the player to like walk around and hope that you understand that the sound effects are for these different things, and then put those things in the right order based off of Rivenese, which you use the Rivenese numbers later on as well when you open up these domes. But I don't know. There is just so much with like I think the thing with both Myst and Riven, I admire their puzzle design for being so integral to how it's part of the story. It's not just
yeah,
like, all right, you are you're exploring this town and all of a sudden you're playing a game of chess because this is a puzzle game. All right, who cares about the chess game? Back to the story. No, no, no. All the puzzles are integral to the story. They build the world even more for you. And I think that's what makes the puzzle design so special. But with that, I think they've designed some puzzles that are just infuriating and not necessarily the most fun.
yeah.
But
I mean, it.
yeah,
I mean, these games have a reputation for being extremely difficult to figure out, and for good reason. They are. You know, they don't necessarily follow, you know, the some of the conventions that you would expect. Um, Although not necessarily to excuse some of that design, but I think it's also important to consider that when these came out, I think you know, nowadays we've just got this like treadmill of media consumption, right? And it's always like, well, you know,
mhm,
on to the next show, on to the next movie, on to the next game, right? Well,
yep,
that's not always true for certain audiences, because then there's like the other subset of, you know, where it's like you do nothing but play Fortnite, you do nothing but play Roblox or whatever, or Call of Duty, you know, like you are like hyper focused on that like one
yep,
experience. But I think more broadly, it's like, okay, like, you know, I got to beat this game so I can go on to the next game and go on to the next game and go on to the next game. And, you know, you expect some resistance, of course. You expect, you know, the game to push back a little bit. You know, the good game design requires that the game can't always give you what you
yeah.
want at all times, or else it's that's not a game. Right? It
And,
has to. There's some give and take. There's pushback against what you want, uh, and ultimately, you know, leads to a more satisfying experience. But I think at the time that these games came out, there was less of this. You know, you people were buying fewer games per year. You know, this might have been the only game you were playing, not just this week. It could be the only game you were playing this month or this season, or this year, right? Like, and it was okay if it took you 3, 4, 5 months to like get through the game. It was just like just something that would
mhm.
sort of I think the intent of these games was not something that, okay, people are just like going to run through it in a week and then they're going to buy the next game,
No,
right?
you need to take your time.
And I think the intent with this game is like it's almost not compatible with our more modern lives, right? Where
Yeah.
I think it is a game that is supposed to kind of just live in the back of your brain, you know, sort of, you know, simmering on the back burner, you know, and you know you're at work or you're at school, and like you just sort of start thinking about it and like something just like clicks into place. You know, it's like the classic, like, you know, shower revelation or something like that,
Mhm.
right? Like you know, like you're not supposed to like figure everything out while you're sitting there at the computer working through the game. I think it's just something that's kind of supposed to almost live in the background of your life, and just like it'd be something you occasionally think about, and then when you come back to it you're like, oh my gosh, that worked. Like I was thinking about that earlier today, and I was like, maybe that's it. And then you go into the game and you're like, oh my gosh, it worked, right? Like that could be
Mhm.
very satisfying too, but it's like that's just almost something that doesn't work with just the way modern society is and modern culture and modern expectations of just going from thing to thing to thing to thing. Like this is a game that is this is meant to just like sort of carve out a place in your brain and
Hmm.
sit there and be with you for, an extended period of time. And to be fair, that's probably not how you or I like ultimately did finish these games, right?
You
Like
know,
we're probably like, okay, I just, and that's why we open up the guide and are like, I want to know what to do,
you
but
know,
not necessarily to excuse some of the puzzle design, but
no.
I think it's designed for a different time, a different audience with different life priorities, I think.
You bring up a couple really interesting points that I think harken like are good like callback to something we talked about before. And real quick, I want to get to that, but I at least want to say to the listeners, like I may be ragging on some of these puzzles, but overall, I can't believe I'm going to say this. I enjoyed the frustration of them.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it was fun to be frustrated in this game, and I can't say that often. And I'm not saying this game is for everyone, but I think what you just said, Try, about how this game kind of goes is completely antithetical to how we handle our gaming habits today. It's complete polar opposites. It's a slow paced, methodical exploration that you're meant to sit with. And in a weird sense, I actually think streaming this helped me enjoy it a lot more because it became more of a communal thing of
Yeah.
trying to figure out stuff with the people. Like there was people who joined my Twitch streams I've never met before. They literally joined because they like to watch people explore Riven. They like to
Yeah.
see like the aha moment that the
Mm.
players get when they solve a puzzle. And they were helping me out without giving me too many hints either, which I really appreciated. There was times when I would just be like, just tell me the answer because I don't like I or tell me if I'm right with this answer. If I'm right, if I'm on the right path, let me know. If I'm not, feel free to tell me as well because I don't want to waste my time. But I also don't want to like I don't mind wasting my time if I'm exploring something. If it's something that's going to take a while to do, only to come around for me to be wrong, then I want to know ahead of time so I don't
Yeah,
waste my
that's
time
fair.
for a game. But that happens so few and far between through my playthrough. But I think really the callback I was referencing is you were saying how like core gamers don't really seem to like be interested in this game anymore. It doesn't have the same reverence
Yeah,
as like the King's Quest games or like the Monkey Island games, like the LucasArts
absolutely.
games.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, like King's Quest people remember because the deaths are super funny and they're going to remember that humor. Monkey
Especially King's
Island,
Quest 5 on the deaths, I'd say.
I've never played a King's Quest game.
Oh, man. Oh, see, that's another PC series I absolutely love.
I will have to. There's so many games I got to get around to. I have like a whole bunch on my backlog that I'm like working on. But in any case, um, I think that like those series had something memorable with the core gamers, and this one the people who like it, the core gamers who like it for the world building. Everyone else can't get past the puzzles. It's kind of like the same people who can't get in. You know what? I equate it to um, if you can't get into the gameplay of Dark Souls, you're not going to really care that much about the world it's trying to build. And if you can't get
Yeah.
in the gameplay of Myst and Riven, you're not going to care about how intricate and interesting the world is. You'd honestly be better reading the Riven books or the Myst books in that aspect.
Although
Or
you lose the visual aspect, which is,
you do,
like
but
I
you can.
said before, I think even if you don't like the style of puzzle, like if you have to use the guide, use it. But I think this is a world that you should see because
Yeah,
I think it's spectacular just from an artistic and world building and atmosphere standpoint. It's just something to behold that I think anyone should experience. But you're right. Like the puzzle design could be absolutely a detriment to a lot of people even getting started because they know that it's very hard and very obtuse. But I say play this game in whatever way lets you experience this world because I think it's very much worth experiencing.
I agree 100%. Now, I do want to let's touch on the story a little bit before we wrap up because we this is like I've loved this conversation because normally I keep my episodes so like rigid, and this has been a lot more like a flowing conversation. I've been really enjoying this,
Well,
man.
it's it's a different kind of game.
It's a non-linear game, and we had a non-linear conversation. How
Exactly.
about that? How about
Exactly.
that, listeners? We can talk a little bit about the story though now. Like we've already touched on the world and like the setup and the plot setup, but the actual like ending and how it works out. Like so if you haven't played it, listeners, spoiler wall right here, we'll talk about it. Honestly, I don't know how much there is to say about it, but it's going to be I think you get more out of the story by, like I said, the frustration of playing through it, is as weird as that sounds. But the story itself is basically you find out that, like I said, Gen has pretty much turned this world it turned Riven into kind of his own place. He has a tyrannical rule over it, and he's getting attacked by this rebellious group of Rivenese led by, like we said, Catherine, Atrus's wife, they believe that Catherine is like a deity, like a savior almost. Like they almost believe she's almost like a Christ-like figure, and she's trying hard to kind of keep that up, sort of, not because she's worried they're gonna like kill her, but because like she doesn't want them to lose that hope. And Gen was while all that is happening, Gen was able to figure out a way out of Riven, but to what he called the 233rd age, which is very confusing because it's like written, the number 233rd is written in Rivenese, and like I said, the number system, they really make you work to figure out how like the hundreds and tens and all this other stuff work. Like people have figured this shit out, and it's wild to me that the game devs thought out a number system so intricately, and I hate it. Like,
I mean,
I
I
don't
mean,
think it's bad. I just hate it.
you know, mathematicians talk about like, different like, what is it, like base 10 number system or whatever like that. That's like what we use. But like in theory, you could come up with like number systems that are more based around, I don't know what you would call it, like a looping point or a reset point that's like something different than 10. And I'm
Well, like Hexa is base 16 or base 8 or whatever. Hexa, I guess, would be base 8, but there is like a 16 base number system where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and
Yeah,
then
see,
and
I'm
then
not a programmer at all, so like these kinds of things are not in my my daily headspace. But yeah, I mean that kind of stuff like definitely probably speaks to some people in a way that it wouldn't for me. Uh, like just wrapping your head around the idea of numbers being in anything but just like increments of 10 is like difficult to comprehend, right?
it I mean it wasn't too hard for I so I did take programming classes, but I mean it's not hard for me to comprehend like a different base, but it is hard for me when I can't see numbers in symbols that I'm used to. Like when you're trying to convert, like if they stuck with the normal base 10 that we're used to, and just listeners, just in case you don't know what we're talking about with this, like essentially the base of a number of accounting system determines when you move up a different digit slot. So you have your ones, your tens, your hundreds, your thousands. So you have different slots for numbers, and it dictates the size of the number. So if you have a one in the 10 slot, that means you have, and then a zero in the one slot, that means you have 10. If that makes sense. If it's one and one, and then it's 11, so on and so forth. The base 10 is the normal counting system that we're used to. Um, but theoretically, if you have a base 16, you would go, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F. And then after F, it would go jump up to the 10 that we know. Then it would go 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And then it would be like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, so on and so forth. And then once you max that out, then it goes up again then it would be 20, and so on and so forth. And you just kind of keep going up the next slot. And so whatever base it is, that's when it jumps to the next slot over. I don't know if I explained that well at all. It is very weird. It
And,
is
like,
very weird.
wrapping your for some reason, like, listening to all that, like, this is maybe a bit of a tangent, but, like, something that popped in my mind through all that and just thinking about, like, the way that you interact with these Cyan worlds in general, it almost makes me think, have you ever seen the movie Arrival?
No, I have not.
It's I love it. Do you know what movie I'm talking about, though?
I believe so, but I haven't seen it, so I
I mean,
think I know I've heard of it though.
I won't spoil anything, but I mean the concept of it is, these aliens arrive in these ships on Earth. The army or whatever brings in this like linguist who is the main character, and her whole thing is to like try to figure out how to communicate with these aliens that are like, I mean, they are not humanoid in any way shape or form, and figuring out any sort of mutual sort of communication, like what do they want, what do they want to say, how to get them to understand what we want to say, and how
Mhm.
to take a message from them. And the I'm sure I'm undervaluing what linguists do in modern society, but that's like, in most languages that's almost a solved problem, right? Like, linguists today for the most part don't have to figure out from scratch, like, how do I like communicate with someone from Thailand or from Germany, or
Yeah.
like that's a solved problem for the most part, right? um Whereas like that is like a new challenge, like no one has ever had to communicate with an intelligent being other than humans before. Like, how do you even begin to approach that problem of creating this link and understanding and communication, of a different system of language and math and all forms of communication and concepts and ideas. And that's like almost like an extreme example, because like the worlds of Myst and Riven aren't as abstract as trying to communicate with an alien. But like the challenges of that for some reason kind of popped into my head when you're talking about like, building these number systems that are like unlike what we just think of as second nature, right? Like,
Yeah.
just but the fact of the matter is, there is a way to break through to these problems and understand them, um even if it's just so completely foreign to how we are used to communicating or used to thinking.
I mean, I can I I don't know what to add to that.
And
I mean, I get it. We're
again,
like
I might be like overthinking like the complexity or
it.
unusualness of these games in some regards. Uh, but to me, they feel unusual. They feel like they go
They
against
are.
conventions. They feel like they make you think in ways that other games don't make you think, and that can be frustrating. That can be frustrating, but it's also fascinating.
I think I think the reason why these games have stuck with me is that the way they design their puzzles is very different. I agree with you. And I think because it's meant for a more slow, steady, explore, take your time, you don't need to solve the puzzles immediately. In fact, you lose something if you solve the puzzles too quickly because you lose all the world building.
Right.
Um, I think that these puzzles are like they are different, and I think that's what makes them feel so different is because they are designed in a way that they make you explore, but they do it in a way where it's not frustrating. Like they're not asking you to retain a whole bunch of information all at once. They give you information and they make it pretty clear like, hey, this is information that you are going to need later. And
I
so
mean,
you
when you
go,
look at
all
the
right,
grand scope of the game, there's not that many like actual steps you have to take.
exactly. There's not a lot of puzzles. That's the crazy thing. There's not a crazy amount of puzzles, but the puzzles are so abstract that it takes you the way you solve them is through exploration versus like it's logic at first and then it's or sorry, it's exploration at first and then it's logic. And real quick, we should at least wrap up the story part. We got a little
Oh yeah,
sidetracked there.
a
Um,
nonlinear conversation for a nonlinear game, as you said.
it's exactly, and that all stemmed off from talking about Gen's 233rd age because the Rivenese,
Yes,
uh,
that's right.
yes,
We
because the
we
Rivenese
barely got
number
going
system.
talking about that.
The number system, I actually think, and then we'll move on to finish up the story. The number system, it's one of those things like when you have a base 16, base 8. I'm not going to try to explain it again, but it's one of those things where I feel like if you can find the person to explain it in the right way to you, then it's like, oh, how did I ever get confused about this in the first place? You just have to find the person that can explain it the right way, and that's at least for me because now that I understand how the different bases work, not saying I could like count well with them or like solve a puzzle with it right away, but I do at least understand how it works. And now that I understand it, like, oh, this is simple. Like I get how this works. It's one of those things where you need someone to explain it in the right way for you personally. And
Yeah.
once
Oh,
that you
yeah.
personally can they explain it well enough for you personally, then it's like, oh, I get it
Yeah,
now.
well, I mean, it's just like, I made, you know, C's and D's in high school math, and then I go to college and I make A's because
Hmm.
I finally found like the right teacher to explain these concepts in ways that's like, oh, I get it now.
Hmm.
And the way that my high school teachers explained it, like, just did not click.
Yep, and sometimes it just takes the right person. But so you go to Gen's back to the story. You go to Gen's 233rd age, and you meet the villain of our game. You meet Gen, played by actor John Keston. And I think it's worth noting that this game is the first game in the series to have a full set of actors. There was a whole bunch of people who were actors in this game, and it's I'm trying to actually, unfortunately, a lot of them passed away somewhat recently. John Keston passed away last year,
Oh,
believe it or
wow.
not. The actress who played Catherine, Sheila Gould, excuse me, she died also somewhat recently.
Dang.
I know it really is a bummer. I'm trying to see if I saw that she passed away somewhat recently, but none of them were in a whole lot of things like in terms of movies and whatnot before or after. I mean, Nayla was played by an actress named Christina Steele, who is her last acting credit was from 2002. So like, but she also was in Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun. So who knows? Um, which was from '99 though. So like, a lot of these actors didn't do a whole lot after that though. Sheila Gould, who like I said was in Riven, she did a voice in the game Shank from 2010. And then she had a couple small roles in like she was in a movie called A Bit of Bad Luck, which isn't rated very highly on IMDb, but she plays a voluptuous woman. That's her credit, a voluptuous woman. But in the movie, Carrie Elwes is in the movie, which is kind of
Oh,
cool.
wow.
Carrie Elwes of all people. Um, oh yeah, so not a lot of the actors did much after the movie. Not saying none of them. I don't have all of their IMDb pages up in front of me. Excuse me, but John Keston, I want to say, at least according to his Wikipedia, he was a singer and stage actor. He was a stage actor predominantly.
Yeah,
Uh,
he has a very stage actory type of presence, I would say.
yes. And let's see. He in 1974, Keston traveled to Washington D.C. with the Royal Shakespeare Company's touring production of Sherlock Holmes. So he toured and did a whole bunch of stuff. That it's I don't
He
know.
always kind of made me think of Moff Tarkin from
Yes,
Star Wars.
his look very
Yes.
much feels like that. But yeah, he's fantastic. But you find he tries to convince you. Gen tries to convince you that what he is doing is the honorable thing, the right thing. He's trying to restore the Denis civilization and, you know, as a way to he seeks atonement for his past transgressions, at least according to Wikipedia, and he um, is trying to restore the Denis civilization. But everything that you've seen of what, once again, like what they did with Myst, where everything you've seen of the world kind of leads you to not believe that he's telling the truth at all.
Yeah, yeah.
And essentially what happens is you don't do you I forget, I don't think you actually get to meet Catherine in person until close to the end of the game. uh yeah, close to the end of the game. Like, she's trapped on an island, and she won't uh meet you in person until you've completely captured Gen. And the way you capture Gen is you have to open the trap book, because what Atris did is that he sends you in, he gives you a book that'll mask it as a linking book out of Riven, only to find out that it's actually a trap for Gen. And Gen will then be trapped in there forever, and they leave the book there as Riven falls apart. So Gen, for all intents and purposes, should be gone. I don't Does Gen appear in later on in the series, or is he
I,
done after this?
I think he's done. I'm pretty sure he only actually appears in Riven. But I think I think he's a great villain. He always just the game does so much to build him up, before
Hmm.
really have that confrontation with him ultimately. And his costume is like on display, like as soon as you go inside Cyan's offices. They have a lot of cool stuff that almost makes their office like feel like one of their worlds.
Hmm. That I love seeing pictures of that. Like, their office looks so cool, and they're up in Washington, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean that was actually like the first time I ever like visited a game studio in any of for any of my life in gaming stuff. So that was a very cool experience, and I just the way that happened was like I found out where my parents were planning summer vacation. I was just like, oh, are we going to be near Spokane? Like, I was just like thinking like where might we be going where I could talk to a video game person that seems like they would be accessible. And for some reason, like Cyan just popped in my head of like, you know what? I bet if I asked, like they'd let me come visit. And they did. It was an awesome experience. So we stopped by Spokane, Washington. I mean, it's not in Spokane proper, but in that area. And Yeah, I mean, it's in such a cool setting. Like it really, I mean, they built that office for the production of Riven,
Yep.
where they are now. I mean, it's the company is so small now. I mean, I don't know how it has expanded and contracted since, because it was like 8 years ago that I did this.
Hmm.
I don't know, what the size is like now, because they did Abduction. They did another game called Firmament, I believe, and
Yep.
then they've done some different variations of Myst. And like you mentioned, I forgot about this, but yeah, they're working on a Riven remake. Um, so they've got they've still got stuff going on. That's great. But yeah, that office, like the space they have is probably too much for. And I think like they rent out some of the detached buildings on the campus, because they don't need all of that space for themselves anymore, right? But that
Hmm.
space was built for Riven. So I think the wooded environment that surrounds it and the architecture of the building was very much meant to inspire the sort of creativity that comes from Myst and ultimately went into Riven.
Hmm. And what is it? They moved during the development of this. Like you said, they built it during Riven. They moved like two times over the course of development. It started out in like a garage, pretty much. Then they were able to get some office space, and then by the end of Riven's development, they had all that. They had the really nice offices that you see now that look like it's something straight
Yeah,
out of one of their worlds.
and they're still
Um,
there.
and they're still there. I love that they're still around and doing stuff. Like I love that they're still making games. I love that they have made games outside of their typical series. Like they're not just doing Myst games, though. You know, recently they have been doing a bunch of Myst games. But between Firmament, which is their more recent game, Abduction from 2016. Like I like that they are still around. I like that they're still making stuff. I just think it's cool.
Yeah.
Um,
By the way,
and
pro tip for abduction. I this was one of my most exciting discoveries in terms of physical game collecting of the past year. I thought there had never been a physical version of abduction because I'm a console gamer. I like to play physical copies. I like to have them for consoles. And even though I was very interested in abduction, as evidenced by me visiting Cyan, and including a bit about its production in the video. I mean, that's what they were working on. I got to see them working on it a little bit on their computers there. I end up never getting a copy because I kept thinking like, oh, maybe there'll be a physical copy someday. Well, there is, only in Japan for some reason.
really,
Japan has a physical copy of Abduction, and the PS4 version. And so you put that
huh?
in a PS4, and it's just in English. There's not even any evidence of Japanese in the game, like even a Japanese language option that I saw. Like it's just English. So
That
there
is
you
so
go. There is a
strange.
physical console version of Abduction. Now, I've not played through it yet, but I played like 15, 20 minutes of it, and it definitely, it still has that sort of that evocative world design, the live action actors that kind of speak to you in this sort of very down to earth way that has this vibe that really only these Cyan games match. So yeah, I mean, it's I don't really know anything about Firmament though, but yeah, I'm super interested to see the remake of this, like that. Like
I mean,
how like can they top the aesthetic of the original? We shall see.
from what I understood with the Mist one, they just like there's like ray tracing and shit. Like it's just
Oh
a
yeah.
really nice, high quality remake, remaster of the original game. Um, Now, sorry, real quick, just to wrap up the plot.
Oh my gosh, we can't get there. We can't get
No,
there.
we keep getting sidetracked. Like I said, you rescue Catherine. You by trapping Yen, you have to somehow tell Atris, like you have to get Atris's attention. So there is this thing called the Star Fissure, which they've referenced throughout the game. It's in minor things. And you have to basically break open the fissure, which then completely destabilizes the world, and that tells Atris like, hey, he did what he needed to do. So he stops keeping the world together, comes back, and then is able to rescue Catherine. But what is weird is that he lets you fall into the void, and he like, the end of the cutscene is pretty much him saying, just like how my Myst book found like another world, I knew you would be fine too. And I'm like, so you just fucking left me? Like you just like where am I going? Like where did like it was so
Well,
weird
at
how
the
the game
beginning
ended.
of the game, though, doesn't he say like there, if all goes well, there's a chance that I can get you back to the place that you came from, right?
I think so. That might
So
be what he was
maybe
referring
like I
to.
don't maybe he's I forget if mystery like implies like what happened to you after that, because you are still the same character in
Hmm.
Myst 3 and 4. You are, it's Atris is all like, my friend, so he recognizes you as yourself. You are you in these games.
Yep. That's super important. They talk. I mentioned in the Mist episode the player character is unnamed because it's supposed to be you, like you the player, like you're supposed to feel immersed into this world. But I there's so much more I could even talk about in reference. I think what was frustrating for me doing research for this. I'm sure there's places on the internet I did not look hard enough for, but I searched for interviews every time. I would literally Google like Riven game interview, because if you just type in Riven interview, Riven is like another company name or something like that. So
Ah,
I would search the Riven game interview, and there was very little interesting there was very little interviews straight up for it. Everything that I could find was either your documentary or the one from the Video Game History Foundation. There was a couple interesting ones where I found one where it talked about that the game used over 3 hours of footage between all the live action actors and all the like little cut scenes that they would intersperse over top of the still images. And those images that they used, there was over 5,000 of them. There was over 5,000 images
Wow.
to make Riven. Um, it was the first game in the series where the game does actually had to direct actual actors. Like I said, it was the first time they had actors on. They had a blue screen and they acted in front of it. They poured a lot of the money that they earned from Myst into this, and holy shit, does it show! Like they
Yeah,
bought.
well, I mean, in my interview, Rand actually said, like, you know, he and his brother, when they set out to make games, like, they weren't like, oh yes, let's get rich. Like, they got all that money, and they're just like, well, I guess we'll just put that into the next game and see what we can make with that kind of money, right?
And
So,
everything's on the screen. Every single thing is on the screen. They bought big Hollywood grade workstations for animation and servers to help better render the 3D software. Like there was so much they poured into this. It was funny though. There was an interview I read where they basically said after Riven comes out, they are not going to make any more sequels in the Myst universe. And well, they technically only made one more, but it is funny that they said that and there's 3 other sequels.
yeah, yeah.
One last fun fact that I was able to find, um, though it was on Wikipedia, but I was able to find a source. It wasn't just like one of the random snippets written on there. Riven was not the original name of the location of the island. The game was going to take place in this is a quote from an article. It will take place in a land called Iquiki, which is definitely not an island. There will be other lands as well. There will be more characters and more animation. Catherine may appear. Cirrus and Achenar definitely will not. So, as we know now, Catherine did appear. Cirrus and Achenar did not. I like how they said it's definitely not an island. And in fact, they made 5 islands.
Yeah,
It's just amazing. Like you can tell that interview was from early in development. They
yeah.
hadn't finished
Yeah.
much yet.
I,
But
I, yeah, I
Ikiki is
wonder
interesting.
how they like settled on that name Riven ultimately. Like, to me, it like kind of creates like this image of like, you know, you know, a rift or something that is, you know, it really kind of does, just the name itself makes you think of something that is, you know, falling apart at the seams. You know, it's
Hmm.
and that is what Riven is. The world, not the game.
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. The world. I mean, that's the whole purpose. The world is falling apart, and Atris, excuse me, has to keep it all together. But yeah, we should probably wrap this up. We're going on almost 2 hours, and this episode, like I said before, is a very non-linear conversation for a very non-linear game.
I mean,
So,
that's what you get when you get me on.
well, we can at least wrap up this episode linearly with some final thoughts on the game and like the actually what like I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this. From what all the fans say, Riven was really where the series should have ended. Like they shouldn't have continued on with the Myst story. I shouldn't say all the fans say that. I've heard that in some of the rumblings and when I've been doing research for this. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the Myst storyline should have ended with Riven? Should it have been just a little 1-2 punch and then they move on to something else?
I mean, you know, I have to confess, I don't remember a lot of specifics about the story in 3, 4, and 5. Which, I mean, you could argue that, well, that shows that they should have ended it. But I remember them being pretty interesting. You know, it's always good to see Atris again. Feels like you're visiting an old buddy. You get to see Atris and Catherine's daughter, you know, go from a baby to being, you know, a little bit older. So there is sort of a nice progression throughout. And then with Myst 5, you know, where it's all in polygon graphics, like there's still sort of this strange quality to the world and the characters. Like the acting still has
Hmm.
that strange Cyan quality to it. There's like this new character. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but he's got this really cool accent, and the way that he talks, like I just the line that always pops out, because like these creatures play this central role in Myst 5, and I just remember he goes, the creatures. It just, I don't know, the way he says it always stuck with me. But yeah, I mean, I I remember like when I got my first PC that was like, actually I would say good enough to really play games on. Like, Myst and Riven were the kinds of games that would play on bad computers. Um, and that's what I had up until that point. And when I got like a computer that could play uh, PC games a bit better, that those were some of the first games that I got. Was I actually got this like dual pack of Myst 3 and 4, because I was like, yeah, that's like
Mm.
that's a series I want to come back to, like that's pulling me back. So I remember, in fact, because I rewatched my own video earlier today. I said in that video that Riven creates a new conclusion to the story. What that was, I sure as heck can't remember today. But 8 years ago, when I played through Myst 5, I was like, oh yeah, there it is. It's wrapped up now. So yeah, I mean, that's where it has ended up now, and it seems like they've kind of gone in the more spiritual successor and remake sort of route these
Mhm.
days. So I'll be really curious with how they uh integrate Gin and other familiar characters into the
Oh,
remake. Like, are they going to be
yeah.
polygons? Are they going to use
Well,
the original performances, either just the voice or the voice and video? Like, man, I really wonder, because like that to me, that would seem so tragic for those performances to be replaced. But I'll keep an open mind. But yeah, sorry, I'm going off on another tangent. We were talking about, do I feel like it should have gone on, and ultimately I enjoyed those games. I
okay. I
enjoyed
mean, there
3,
you
4, and
go.
5. Again, they didn't stay with me like Myst and Riven did, but I certainly enjoyed playing them. 3 has Brad Dourif in it,
Mhm.
which is
Yep.
kind of awesome.
Um, it's one of those things where like a lot of these PC games ended up getting big actors in them. The iconic one of Tim Curry in Command and Conquer.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Spice. Uh,
Space.
but we can start wrapping up this episode. Try so. Final thoughts on Riven. I will let you have the last word, sir. I will give mine real quick, and I'll let you have the final thoughts. Um,
I feel like I've had too much last word this
no,
entire
what are you talking
podcast.
about? No, it's you made my job easy. A little behind the scenes. If I don't think I even told you this off mic, I actually have like I'm dealing with an ulcer right now, so I'm
Ugh.
worried that like it's not been hard to speak. It actually worked out pretty well for tonight, but the last week I was like, please go away. I have a lot of podcast recording this week, but no, my final thoughts on Riven. I'm so happy I finally played this. I really enjoyed my time with this. I enjoyed the frustration. Like I said, I was very surprised how much I enjoyed the frustration of the puzzles. I wasn't afraid to look up the solutions when I got really stuck. Some of the puzzles are garbage, but in a weird sense, I don't hate that they're bad because it allowed me to explore a world and really get to know a sense of the story and the culture of the world that it built. Like Myst, it had stories, but because you were seeing the aftermaths of everything that occurred, it was hard to kind of follow everything that they were trying to tell you. In Riven, they tell a pretty cohesive story. You see the Rivenese, like you see people in the town, like they run away from you and they'll set off alarms at you. But like you see the actual people, and
You're,
so
you're
it
smack
doesn't
dab in the middle of the situation.
exactly. And so even though you don't see them very often or much of them at all. It still creates that sensation that there's more in there than you would expect. Like you're, it really creates a sensation of like not feeling quite as alone, but still feeling eerie. Like you explore so many different things and it still feels eerie. Like I still remember finding Gen's like hidden underground like area where you see the work and everything. And one of his disciples sees you and starts running. So you chase after him. Um, and obviously you can't catch up to him, but still it was just like I remember the first time seeing it, I'm like, oh, that guy, go get him. And it was, you know, obviously you can't ever catch him, but still it was really, really fun and interesting. I'm just happy I finally played it. I don't understand the hate that these games get online, or maybe not the hate, but the dislike. No, I understand the dislike. I don't understand why they're not more beloved in the gaming community at large. Like I feel like not enough people talk about
Yeah.
how incredibly groundbreaking the visuals were for this. Like people only talk about the visuals and how it popularized CD, but I really don't think people, specifically with Riven, people don't talk about the visuals of Riven enough. I don't think people talk about how much the storytelling in these games really advanced storytelling in games in general. Like the amount of depth to the world is just staggering for a game this age, and there's so much. Like there are people who build lore bibles of this. Like people literally watch my stream just because they wanted me to, like, there was one point I was just reading Gen's journal. I'm like, I'm sorry, viewers, like I have to read this. And the one guy was like, don't apologize. We love this. Like we love the like all of this lore. And like even though they've read it, like seen it a bunch of times because they're fans of Riven, they still enjoyed just watching me read it. It was very I mean, I was reading it out loud. I wasn't just like reading it silently. I tried to make it at least a little entertaining, but like it I think that to me is more the legacy of it. Like it's a game series that I don't think gets enough credit,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at the same time is credited with a lot of important things. It's like people are like, yeah, CD-ROMs, cool graphics, whatever. Puzzles are dumb, move on. And I feel like that's a big disservice to what it does. Like, yes, the puzzles are frustrating; they're not always good, but I think they are a prime example of what happens when you can try something new and make puzzle, like really try to integrate your puzzles into your game's world and story to enhance it and be actively part of telling the story as to opposed to just being like next to it, like they're, you know, just off to the side where it's not really affecting the story but it's there for gameplay. So I love this game. I really enjoyed my time with it. Riven stuck with me a lot more than Myst did in terms of the story, even though I think I enjoy Myst's world a little bit more. Like I like the island of Myst to me is still more mysterious, pun, but Riven I think is a lot more fully fleshed out and it's a lot more interesting to explore and talk about. And I wish I could have been more articulate into explaining like how interesting, how cool the lore is in this game. So
Yeah.
that's my final thoughts. It's a fantastic game and it's worth trying out and it's worth getting frustrated over. And that'll be my final thoughts.
You know, you know, it's cool to hear you talk again about, you know, the sort of the different crowd that streaming the game brought out of the woodwork. Because again, I had that same experience with my video, and that's kind of what I expected when I did that. Because it's like, yes, these games were a big deal, and you know, guess what? They did stick with those people. It's just that, and this is not a bad thing necessarily. It's just that those people were not necessarily the people who stayed close to video games as a whole. And I think that's just a fascinating part of these games' legacy. That they have really stuck with people, but they have stuck with a different crowd that were looking for different things with their gaming or multimedia
Hmm.
experiences, if you will. But yeah, I mean, what a spectacular game! I think from just a purely aesthetic standpoint. If nothing else, I mean, I guess in some ways, everything that surrounds the game is aesthetic related, but um, it's just I miss this era, man, of CG visuals being at the cutting edge, absolute cutting edge. I mean, the stuff they were pulling off in this game was like big deal, difficult stuff to do. And at some point, CG became so easy that it was cheap. And at the point where CG was expensive and cutting edge and took the best and brightest to pull off, I think it comes together as something that stands the test of time, um, because they were the best and brightest putting it together. And over time, that technology became cheaper and more accessible and was eventually used in much more mundane ways, and then eventually faded off into the background where that style of visual and game making all but died out, or was used only for very, very low budget products. But that era of like late 90s and a bit into the early 2000s, where the best of the best was making that like high end uh computer generated imagery. That's just such a special era of game technology and art to me, that I think that's a big part of where that legacy is. And I think it's something that people should keep an open mind about exploring
Hmm.
today. No matter how you have to do it to see this world, and experience its sights and sounds and atmosphere, and what it makes you feel. I think it's worth it.
No, I agree with you, man. I love this game. I'm really happy I finally got to experience it. I'm so happy I got to have you on for this episode. This was everything I hoped it would be. 2 hours of Rivenese, of Riven
Oh,
talk. Um,
oh
uh,
man, that's like I say, you're always in for a long conversation with me,
I love
whether
I
you want it or not.
oh no, it's funny, some people don't like long podcast episodes. Whenever I see a podcast episode of a show I like and I see it's like a long episode, I go, "Ooh, this is going to be a good one." I get
Well,
really excited.
that's the reactions we get with my life and gaming as well. Like people are disappointed when it's you know shorter than the previous video. They're like, oh.
It's only 20
Like they're
minutes.
like, oh man, over 2 hours. That hasn't happened very many times, but it has happened. People
Well,
are like,
those videos
oh
take for
man,
like I mean, I can only imagine how long a 2-hour video
oh,
would take to make. Like, oh
oh,
my gosh, the amount of
oh.
B-roll you'd have to film, all the scripts, the amount of like flubs and edits. I don't even want to think about
Well, the
it.
good news is that there's two of us. So, if I am producing half of a video and Corey's producing half of a video, ultimately we've made a video that is twice as long as the effort either of us put into it. So that's always nice.
That is very true. That is very true. But all right, let's wrap up this episode, Try. So thank you once again for joining me, my friend. Always a pleasure having you on the show. As usual, where can the good people find you online? And is there anything you'd like to promote?
Yeah, pretty much just find me on the YouTube channel, My Life in Gaming. I'm not much of anywhere else online these days. Pretty much just stay in the YouTube ecosystem there. We stream on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. And I also do streams with the Backloggery community. Our stream there is on Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/backloggery. And we stream there for 4 hours every Monday, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, that's I love my stream nights. Sometimes that's the most gaming that you get in a week, right? Like there's nothing
That's
nothing
why
wrong
I
with a bit of
stream.
there's nothing wrong with a bit of scheduled fun. I say, it's sometimes it stops you, from going firing on all cylinders, and just like step back and just be like, oh yes, game time. I needed that.
That's what is it? I at the time we're recording this, because this won't be out until February. Um, the time we're recording this, I actually just beat the original God of War on stream again for the first time in like over a
Oh.
decade. So I feel you on that. Like streaming gives me a time to like it, because I'm so used to editing all the time. The stream almost holds me
Yep.
accountable to continue to play games. I know
Yes.
it sounds weird, but like
Yeah.
sometimes like I will be playing a game and I'll be like, all right, this game's not like holding my interest. I'll move on to something else. And then that's awful. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you should just like keep forcing yourself through a game that you despise, but I feel like if you're giving up so quickly, you're not really giving any game much of a chance. So
Right, right, right.
streaming has forced me to give games like
Yes.
Riven. I don't know if I would have finished Riven if it wasn't for streaming,
Yep.
because I felt I had to keep on going
It helps you
to keep it going.
dig deeper and find, something to love. I mean, one of the games that that I gushed about in our most recent episode that was on the games we played in 2023 was Amagon on NES, which
Hmm.
I looked on YouTube and I could only find like two videos that seemed to be reviews of Amagon, and both were negative. I might have the only portion of any video on YouTube that's like, you know what? Hamagon's actually kind of interesting. It's kind of got some good stuff going on in it, So it can force you to uh, really dig in and like get yourself in this mindset of like, oh, I kind of get this now. I kind of see what this was going for. It people are like, oh, fun should be spontaneous or whatever. But I think having a bit of scheduled fun is like super healthy. Like streams keep me sane. It's such a good thing to have in my life every week.
I feel you on that, man. Like it by being able to find time for myself with streaming, it has helped keep me sane a little bit and forced me to um play games that I used it as an excuse to play games that I normally wouldn't play either. So it's been a
Oh
lot of
yeah,
fun.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you
Well,
you were
just
meant
like this coming Monday, I'm going to play Mortal Kombat 9
okay.
on PS3, which like fighting games are like, aside from like Soul Calibur and Smash Brothers, like fighting games are so outside my wheelhouse. But like my friends finally talked me into like, oh, you like just play the story mode and like the Mortal Kombat game starting at 9, like because it's like super well done. And so I'm like, oh, okay. Like, would I ever do that without a stream? Pr- Probably not, right? But
Yeah.
and maybe I'll discover that it's like, oh, like maybe I can actually start getting into fighting games a bit more than I used to. Who knows? Who knows?
And by the time people listen to that, it's not even going to be it's going to be way past that
Oh
stream
yeah,
date. So
yeah,
you
yeah.
have to look for it in
I'll
the
be
VOD.
like all about Mortal Kombat.
Yep.
Who knows? Who knows? Who could say?
But anyway, for myself, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, at Still Loading Pod on all of them, Twitch at Still Loading Pod, like I mentioned before. You can also support the show by going to or by giving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use. It helps people find the show and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/stillloadingpod for $1 a month. You'll get all the episodes a few days earlier, episodes like this one at a higher bit rate, as well as access to patron voting rights, which I've been doing a lot of polls recently. Well, time this comes out, a lot of the polls will be over, but there are quarterly polls, and I started something new this year. This will be the first episode I think I mentioned it on. I'm going to start doing a backlog month every year, which is in November. I had my patrons vote on a list of 16 different games. They could vote for as many of the games as they wanted. The top 4 are the ones that are getting covered in November this year. And at the time we're recording this, those 4 have not been decided, though at least one of them I'm pretty sure is going to get one of the slots. It's the Order 1886 will be one of the games covered. But yeah, my patrons help voted for that, so that happens once a year, and there's quarterly patron polls every 3 months to help pick other episodes. So lots of ways to get your voice heard and make me play games that maybe I don't want to play. We'll find out.
But then you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, I will enjoy the frustration like I did with Riven here. Um, as for that's all at the $1 level. At the $4 level, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, as well as access to 2 bonus episodes every month. And at the $5 level, you get everything I mentioned prior, plus access to Still Bonding, which Try has been on before. Still Bonding is my monthly James Bond podcast where me and a bunch of friends, like Try, bond over 007. So if you want to check that out, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. You can support it over there. There's I think you were on twice, maybe. I don't
No,
remember
I've only
anymore.
been on once so far.
Were you only on once? Okay, Try was on for Live and Let Die.
Yep.
And so patreon.com/stillloadingpod.
I feel like you're only on once should be a Bond movie.
The what? Sorry?
I said I feel like you only you're only on once should be the title of a Bond movie.
Or like an Abbott and Costello meet James Bond. You're only on once. You're only on first base. He's our shortstop. Anyway, but that's all the time I have for you for this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for supporting me. Try, thank you once again for being on the show.
Yep, of course.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.
Betere tere wira tere lokene kalak.